Story 1. The monk who carried nothing. In the ancient mountains of Tibet, where the air grew thin and the silence thick as morning mist, there lived a monk named Tenzin, who had spent 40 years learning to carry nothing at all. Not in his hands, not in his heart, and certainly not in his mind. The other monks in the monastery often watched him with curious eyes, for Tenzin moved through the world as if he were made of the same substance as the wind itself. Each morning, as the first light touched the snow-capped peaks, Tenzin would rise from his simple mat and begin his day with a ritual that seemed strange to those who did not understand. He would sit in the center of his small cell, close his eyes, and spend 1 full hour releasing everything he had accumulated during his sleep. Dreams he would let go. Worries about the day ahead he would release. Even the simple pleasure of having slept well he would offer to the morning air. The younger monks would sometimes ask him why he did this. "Master Tenzin," they would say, "surely some thoughts are worth keeping. Surely some feelings serve us well." And Tenzin would smile, his weathered face creasing like old leather, and he would tell them about the day he learned the true meaning of carrying nothing. It had been during his 20th year at the monastery. A terrible storm had swept through the mountains, lasting for 7 days and 7 nights. The wind howled like hungry ghosts, and the snow fell so heavily that the monastery was completely cut off from the outside world. Food became scarce, and the monks began to worry. Some hoarded their small portions, hiding bits of bread and dried fruit in their robes. Others spent their meditation time calculating how long their supplies might last. But Tenzin did something different. Each morning of the storm, he would take his small portion of food and eat it slowly, completely, with full attention. He would taste every grain of barley, every drop of tea, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. And when it was finished, he would sit in meditation and release even the memory of having eaten. He would let go of the satisfaction, the temporary fullness, the brief comfort it had provided. On the 4th day of the storm, one of the younger monks approached him, his face gaunt with worry. "Master Tenzin," the young monk said, "are you not afraid? Do you not worry about tomorrow's meal?" Tenzin looked at the young man with eyes that seemed to hold the depth of mountain lakes. "My dear friend," he said softly, "I have discovered something wonderful. When you carry nothing, you can receive everything." The young monk did not understand, so Tenzin continued. "Watch the snow falling outside our window. Each flake is perfect, unique, beautiful. But if I tried to catch them and keep them, what would happen?" The young monk thought for a moment. "They would melt in your hands, master." "Exactly." Tenzin nodded. "And if I worried about the flakes that had already fallen or feared the ones that might fall tomorrow, what would I miss?" "The beauty of the ones falling now," the young monk whispered. "This is why I carry nothing," Tenzin explained. "Not because I do not care, but because I care so deeply that I want to be completely present for whatever comes. When I release my grip on yesterday's bread, I can fully taste today's. When I let go of tomorrow's fears, I can completely receive this moment's gifts." As the storm continued, something remarkable began to happen. The monks who had been hoarding food found that their hidden stores brought them no peace. They would lie awake at night, worried that others might discover their secret supplies, anxious about whether they had hidden enough. Their meditation became scattered, their prayers distracted by calculations and concerns. But Tenzin slept deeply each night, his rest undisturbed by the howling wind. He would lie on his simple mat, his body completely relaxed, his mind clear as mountain air. The other monks began to notice that despite eating no more than anyone else, Tenzin seemed somehow nourished in a way that went beyond physical food. His eyes remained bright, his step remained steady, his presence remained calm and centered. On the seventh day, as the storm finally began to clear, a group of travelers appeared at the monastery gates. They had been trapped in a cave lower on the mountain and had finally been able to make their way to safety. They carried with them supplies of food and warm clothing, grateful gifts for the monks who had provided them shelter. As the travelers shared their story, they mentioned something that made all the monks pause. They had been carrying enough supplies for a month-long journey, but on the first day of the storm, they had made a decision. Rather than rationing their food, carefully trying to make it last as long as possible, they had chosen to eat well each day, trusting that somehow, some way, they would find what they needed. "We realized," one of the travelers said, "that if we spent all our time worrying about running out of food, we would miss the opportunity to enjoy the food we had. And, strangely, when we stopped worrying about having enough, we seemed to need less. Our bodies felt satisfied with smaller portions. Our minds felt peaceful instead of anxious." Tenzin smiled as he listened to this story, and the other monks began to understand. The travelers had discovered the same truth that Tenzin had been living for 20 years. When you carry nothing, when you release your grip on outcomes and fears, you create space for life to provide what you truly need. That night, as the monastery settled into peaceful sleep, the young monk who had questioned Tenzin came to him once more. "Master," he said, "I think I am beginning to understand. But how do I learn to carry nothing? How do I release my grip on all the things my mind wants to hold onto?" Tenzin gestured for the young monk to sit beside him. Outside, the stars were appearing one by one in the clear mountain sky, each one brilliant against the darkness. "Look at those stars," Tenzin said. "They have been shining for millions of years, yet they do not strain to hold on to their light. They simply shine moment by moment, without grasping at yesterday's brightness or worrying about tomorrow's fuel. This is how we learn to carry nothing," he continued, "not by forcing ourselves to let go, but by remembering our true nature. We are like those stars designed to shine without effort, to give without depletion, to be present without strain. When we remember, this releasing becomes as natural as breathing." The young monk sat in silence, feeling something shift inside his chest. It was as if a tight fist that had been clenched around his heart for years was slowly beginning to open. "But Master," he whispered, "what if I forget? What if I wake up tomorrow and my mind is full of worries again?" Tenzin's laugh was soft as falling snow. "Then you will practice again and again and again. This is not about perfection, my friend. This is about returning moment by moment to what is true. Each time you notice that you are carrying something heavy, you have a choice. You can continue to carry it, or you can set it down and rest." As the weeks passed after the storm, the young monk began to practice what Tenzin had taught him. Each morning he would sit quietly and notice what he was carrying from the previous day: resentment about a harsh word from another monk, anxiety about his progress in meditation, pride about a moment when he had felt particularly wise or compassionate. One by one he would acknowledge these burdens and then gently set them down. At first it felt strange, almost irresponsible. Surely he thought some of these things were important to remember. Surely some of his worries were legitimate concerns that required his attention. But as he continued the practice, he began to notice something remarkable. When he released his grip on these mental and emotional burdens, he did not become careless or irresponsible. Instead, he became more present, more responsive, more able to meet each situation with clarity and wisdom. The other monks began to notice the change in him. His movements became more graceful, his speech more thoughtful, his presence more peaceful. During group meditation, his stillness seemed to deepen the silence for everyone. During work periods, his focused attention made even mundane tasks feel sacred. One evening, as autumn painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Tenzin called the young monk aside. "You have learned something important," he said, "but now I want to teach you the deepest secret of carrying nothing." The young monk's eyes widened with anticipation. "The deepest secret," Tenzin continued, "is that when you truly carry nothing, you discover that you are everything. When you release your grip on the small self with its endless needs and fears, you realize your connection to the vast self that includes all beings, all experiences, all possibilities." That night, as the young monk lay on his mat preparing for sleep, he practiced what Tenzin had taught him. He released the day's experiences, the conversations, the small victories and disappointments. He let go of his plans for tomorrow, his hopes for his spiritual progress, even his gratitude for Tenzin's teachings. And in that space of complete emptiness, he felt something extraordinary. He felt as if he were floating in an ocean of peace that had no beginning and no end. He was no longer a separate being lying on a mat in a monastery cell. He was the awareness in which all experiences arose and dissolved. He was the silence between thoughts, the space between breaths, the stillness that underlies all movement. In this state of carrying absolutely nothing, he discovered that he lacked absolutely nothing. He was complete, whole, perfect, exactly as he was. And with this realization, he drifted into the deepest, most restful sleep of his life. His dreams filled with the gentle light of stars that shine without effort, give without depletion, and rest in the eternal peace of carrying nothing at all. Story 2. The Garden of Letting Go. In a valley where cherry blossoms bloomed for only 3 days each spring, there lived an old gardener named Kenji, who had spent his entire life learning the art of perfect timing. His garden was famous throughout the region, not for its size or exotic plants, but for something far more mysterious. Every person who spent time in Kenji's garden left feeling lighter, as if invisible burdens had been gently lifted from their shoulders. The secret Kenji would tell those who asked was not in what he planted, but in what he allowed to die. Each season he would walk through his garden with a pair of well-worn pruning shears, but he rarely used them to cut. Instead, he would pause at each plant, each flower, each branch, and listen, not with his ears, but with something deeper. He would listen for the plant's readiness to release what it no longer needed. This practice had begun 40 years earlier, when Kenji was a young man consumed by the desire to create the perfect garden. He would work from dawn until dusk, carefully controlling every aspect of his plant's growth. He would tie branches to stakes to force them into pleasing shapes, trim leaves the moment they showed signs of aging, and replant flowers the instant they began to fade. But despite all his efforts, his garden felt lifeless. Visitors would admire the neat rows and perfectly shaped bushes, but no one lingered. No one sat on the stone bench he had placed beneath the old maple tree. No one returned again and again, drawn by something they could not name, but desperately needed. The transformation began on a morning in late autumn when Kenji discovered that a storm had damaged much of his carefully maintained garden. Branches lay scattered across the paths, leaves were strewn everywhere, and many of his prized flowers had been uprooted. His first instinct was to rush around, cleaning up, restoring everything to its previous order. But as he stood surveying the damage, something made him pause. Perhaps it was exhaustion from years of constant effort, or perhaps it was a whisper of wisdom from somewhere deep within. Instead of immediately beginning the cleanup, he sat down on his stone bench and simply observed. What he saw surprised him. The scattered leaves had created natural mulch around the base of his trees. The fallen branches had formed small shelters where birds were already beginning to nest. The uprooted flowers, rather than dying, immediately seemed to be adapting to their new positions, their roots seeking fresh soil in unexpected places. For the first time in years, Kenji's garden looked alive in a way that his careful maintenance had never achieved. There was a wildness to it, a sense of natural flow and organic beauty that his controlling efforts had inadvertently suppressed. He realized that in his desire to create perfection, he had been preventing his garden from expressing its own inherent wisdom. That day, Kenji made a decision that would change not only his garden, but his entire approach to life. He would learn to work with nature's timing rather than against it. He would practice the art of letting go, of allowing natural cycles to unfold without his constant interference. The first lesson came with the changing of the seasons. As winter approached, Kenji had always rushed to cut back his perennial plants, to rake up every fallen leaf, to prepare everything for the cold months ahead. But this year, he waited. He watched as his plants began their own process of releasing what they no longer needed. The roses dropped their petals one by one, creating a carpet of faded beauty on the ground. The maple tree released its leaves in waves of gold and crimson, each one falling exactly when it was ready. The lavender plants allowed their flowers to dry naturally on the stem, releasing their fragrance slowly into the autumn air. As Kenji observed this natural process of letting go, he began to notice something remarkable happening within himself. The constant tension he had carried in his shoulders began to ease. The worried thoughts that usually filled his mind as winter approached began to quiet. He found himself sleeping more deeply, waking more refreshed, moving through his days with a sense of ease he had not felt in decades. One morning, as the first frost painted delicate patterns on his garden gate, an old woman appeared on the path. She was bent with age, her steps slow and careful, but her eyes were bright with a kind of inner light that immediately caught Kenji's attention. She paused at the entrance to his garden and asked if she might sit for a while on his stone bench. Kenji welcomed her warmly, and as she settled herself beneath the now bare maple tree, she began to speak. Her voice was soft but clear, like water flowing over smooth stones. She told him that she had been walking this path for 70 years, ever since she was a young woman dealing with the loss of her first child. "I have watched your garden through all these seasons," she said, "and I have seen it change. In the early years, it was beautiful but somehow tight, like a person holding their breath. But now there is something different. Now it breathes. Now it teaches." Kenji was curious about what she meant by teaching, so he asked her to explain. The old woman smiled and gestured toward a section of the garden where the summer's sunflowers still stood. Their heavy heads now bowed and their seeds scattered by the wind. "Those sunflowers," she said, "they are teaching the most important lesson of all. They grew tall and strong. They turned their faces to the sun. They produced beautiful flowers and nourishing seeds. And now they are teaching us how to let go gracefully. They are not clinging to their summer glory. They are not fighting the natural process of decline. They are simply allowing themselves to complete their cycle with dignity. As the old woman spoke, Kenji felt something shift inside his chest. He realized that he had been learning the same lesson, not just in his garden, but in his life. For years, he had been like his old garden, trying to control outcomes, fighting natural processes, clinging to things long after they were ready to be released. The old woman continued, "I come here now because your garden has become a place of healing. When I sit beneath this tree and watch the natural cycles unfold without resistance, I remember that I too can let go of what I no longer need. The grief that has been my companion for so many years, the regrets that have weighed down my heart, the fears about growing old and dying. Your garden teaches me that letting go is not about giving up. It is about making space for new life." That winter, Kenji spent long hours in quiet contemplation, watching his garden rest beneath its blanket of snow. He began to understand that the art of letting go was not just about gardening. It was about life itself. Every day brought opportunities to practice release, small disappointments that could be acknowledged and then allowed to pass, old resentments that could be examined and then gently set aside, expectations about how things should unfold that could be held lightly rather than gripped tightly. He started each morning with a simple ritual. Before beginning any work in the garden, he would sit on his stone bench and ask himself what he was carrying that he no longer needed. Sometimes it was worry about a plant that seemed to be struggling. Sometimes it was frustration about the weather not cooperating with his plans. Sometimes it was deeper things, old hurts, persistent fears, the weight of trying to be perfect. Whatever he discovered, he would acknowledge it with kindness and then consciously release it. He would imagine placing it in the compost pile at the back of his garden where it could decompose and eventually nourish new growth. This practice became as natural to him as watering his plants or weeding his beds. As spring returned and his garden began to awaken, Kenji noticed that visitors were coming more frequently. They would arrive looking tense and hurried, but after spending time among his plants, they would leave with softer expressions and slower steps. Many would return again and again, drawn by something they could not quite name, but deeply needed. One day, a young mother came to the garden carrying her infant son. She looked exhausted and overwhelmed, her eyes red from crying. She sat on the bench and began to speak her words, tumbling out in a rush of anxiety and self-doubt. She was terrified that she was not a good enough mother, that she was making mistakes that would harm her child, that she was failing at the most important job of her life. Kenji listened with compassion, remembering his own years of trying to be the perfect gardener. When she finished speaking, he gently guided her attention to a section of the garden where wildflowers grew in seemingly random patterns. "Do you see how these flowers grow?" he asked. "They do not follow a predetermined plan. They do not worry about whether they are blooming in exactly the right spot or at exactly the right time. They simply respond to the conditions around them moment by moment." The young mother looked at the wildflowers and slowly her breathing began to deepen. "But what if I make the wrong choice?" she whispered. "What if I damage him somehow?" Kenji smiled and pointed to an old oak tree that stood at the edge of the garden. "That tree has weathered many storms," he said. "Some of its branches have been broken, some of its leaves have been damaged by insects, some seasons have brought too much rain, while others have brought drought. But look at it now. It is strong and beautiful, not despite these challenges, but because of how it has learned to bend without breaking, to heal what can be healed, and to let go of what cannot be saved." As the months passed, the young mother became a regular visitor to the garden. She would bring her son and sit beneath the oak tree, practicing the art of letting go that Kenji's garden taught so eloquently. She learned to release her grip on the need to be perfect, to let go of comparing herself to other mothers, to trust in her own natural wisdom and her child's inherent resilience. The garden continued to teach its lessons through every season. In summer, the roses showed how to bloom fully without holding back, giving their beauty generously to anyone who passed by. In autumn, the trees demonstrated how to release what had served its purpose, letting go with grace and dignity. In winter, the entire garden rested in peaceful acceptance, showing that periods of dormancy and apparent emptiness were not failures but necessary parts of the cycle of growth. And through it all, Kenji continued to learn and practice the art of letting go. He discovered that the more he released his grip on how things should be, the more beauty and wisdom he was able to perceive in how things actually were. His garden became not just a place of plants and flowers, but a living meditation on the profound peace that comes from working in harmony with the natural rhythms of growth, flowering, release, and rest. As evening settled over the valley and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Kenji would often sit on his stone bench and feel deep gratitude for the lessons his garden had taught him. He had learned that true mastery was not about control, but about surrender. Not about forcing outcomes, but about creating conditions for natural wisdom to unfold. And, most importantly, he had learned that in the art of letting go, there was no final destination, only the endless, beautiful practice of releasing what was ready to be released moment by precious moment. Story 3. The river that taught stillness. Along the banks of the Mekong River, where the water flowed with the patience of centuries, there lived a fisherman named Tik, who had discovered that the secret to catching fish was not in the catching at all, but in the perfect stillness that came before it. Every morning before dawn, he would take his small wooden boat to the same quiet bend in the river, where ancient willows dipped their branches into the slow-moving current. But Tik was not like other fishermen. While they would cast their nets with urgency, checking them constantly and growing frustrated when the fish did not come quickly, Tik would simply sit in his boat and become as still as the deep water beneath him. He had learned this practice from his grandfather, who had learned it from his grandfather before him in an unbroken line of wisdom that stretched back through generations of river people. The teaching had begun when Tik was 7 years old, small and impatient, and eager to prove himself as a fisherman. His grandfather had taken him out on the river for the first time, and Tik had been full of excitement and nervous energy. He had wanted to cast the net immediately to pull it in quickly to see what they had caught. But his grandfather had made him sit quietly for what felt like hours doing nothing but watching the water. "Grandfather," young Tik had whispered, "when will we start fishing?" The old man had smiled and pointed to the surface of the river where small ripples caught the morning light. "We are already fishing," he had said, "but first we must learn to fish for stillness. The fish will come when we are ready to receive them, not when we are ready to take them." At 7 years old, Tik had not understood the difference. Taking and receiving seemed like the same thing to his young mind. But As the years passed and he continued to accompany his grandfather on these dawn expeditions, he began to sense something deeper in the old man's approach to the river. His grandfather never seemed anxious about whether they would catch enough fish. He never grew impatient when the water was quiet. Instead, he would sit in perfect stillness, his breathing so calm and regular that sometimes Tick would watch his chest just to make sure he was still alive. And in that stillness, something magical would happen. Fish would begin to appear, drawn by something they seemed to sense in the old man's presence. It was not until Tick was 15 that he began to understand what his grandfather had been teaching him all those years. They were sitting in their usual spot, the morning mist rising from the water like the breath of sleeping spirits, when his grandfather spoke in a voice so quiet it was barely audible above the gentle lapping of the current. "The river is always moving," he said, "but it is also always still. This is the great paradox that most people never learn to see. The surface moves, the current flows, but underneath, in the deep places, there is a stillness that has never been disturbed. When we learn to find that place of stillness within ourselves, we become like the deep water. We can move when movement is needed, but we are always rooted in peace." That morning, for the first time, Tick felt it. As he sat quietly in the boat, his breathing gradually slowing to match his grandfather's rhythm, he felt something shift inside his chest. It was as if he were sinking down through layers of restlessness and anxiety, through the choppy surface waters of his teenage worries and desires, down into a place of profound calm that he had never known existed within him. In that deep stillness, his awareness expanded. He could feel the fish moving beneath the boat, not as separate creatures to be caught, but as part of the same living system that included the water, the willows, his grandfather, and himself. He could sense their patterns, their preferences, their natural rhythms. And he understood that fishing was not about imposing his will upon the river, but about harmonizing with the intelligence that was already present in the water. When his grandfather finally cast the net that morning, it was with a movement so fluid and natural that it seemed like the river itself was reaching up to embrace the fish. And when they pulled in the net, it was full of silver bodies that seemed to have offered themselves willingly to this dance of giving and receiving. Years passed, and Tick's grandfather grew old and eventually returned to the earth from which he had come. But the teachings lived on in Tick's daily practice on the river. Each morning, he would row out to the quiet bend and spend the first hour simply sitting in stillness, not fishing for fish, but fishing for the deep peace that his grandfather had shown him. During this hour of stillness, Tick would practice what he had come to think of as river meditation. He would begin by matching his breathing to the gentle rhythm of the current. Inhale as the water flowed toward him, exhale as it flowed away. Gradually his heartbeat would slow to match the ancient pulse of the river itself. As his body settled into stillness, his mind would begin to quiet. The worries that had followed him from his small house in the village would gradually dissolve like salt stirred into water. Concerns about money, about his aging mother, about the changes happening in the world around him would all sink down into the deep stillness that his grandfather had taught him to find. But the most remarkable thing about this practice was what happened to his awareness. As his personal anxieties and desires grew quiet, he became aware of a vast intelligence that permeated everything around him. He could sense the fish not as objects to be captured, but as expressions of the same life force that flowed through his own veins. He could feel the trees breathing, the insects humming their ancient songs, the earth itself turning slowly in its cosmic dance. In this expanded awareness, fishing became something entirely different from what most people understood it to be. It became a form of communion, a way of participating in the endless exchange of energy that connected all living things. When he cast his net, it was not with the grasping energy of someone trying to take something from the river, but with the open-handed generosity of someone offering himself to the river's wisdom. Word of Tik's unusual success as a fisherman began to spread throughout the region. Other fishermen would come to observe his methods, expecting to learn some secret technique or discover some special equipment. But what they found puzzled them. Tik used the same simple nets and the same basic boat as everyone else. The only difference was the way he sat in perfect stillness for long periods before he began to fish. Most of the visiting fishermen would try to imitate this stillness for a few minutes, but they could not sustain it. Their minds were too busy, their bodies too restless, their hearts too full of wanting. They would give up quickly and return to their old methods of constant activity and anxious effort. But occasionally, someone would come who was ready to learn what Tik's grandfather had taught him. These students would sit with Tik morning after morning, learning to breathe with the river, learning to sink down through the layers of mental chatter into the deep stillness that was always present beneath the surface of consciousness. One such student was a young woman named Lin, who had come to the river not to learn fishing, but to escape the overwhelming anxiety that had been consuming her life. She had heard stories about the peaceful fisherman who seemed to have found some secret to inner calm, and she was desperate enough to try anything. When Lin first sat in the boat with Tik, she could barely remain still for 5 minutes. Her mind raced with thoughts, her body fidgeted constantly, and she felt as if she might jump out of her skin from nervous energy. But Tik was patient with her, just as his grandfather had been patient with him. The river did not learn to flow in a single day, he told her gently. It carved its channels slowly over thousands of years by moving consistently in the same direction. Your mind has carved channels of anxiety and restlessness over many years. It will take time and patience to carve new channels of peace. Day after day, Lin returned to the river. At first, she could only manage a few minutes of relative stillness before her anxiety would overwhelm her. But gradually, as she learned to breathe with the water and to let her awareness sink down into the deeper currents of her being, she began to discover what Tik and his grandfather had found. There was indeed a place of profound stillness within her, a place that had never been touched by her worries or fears. It was like finding a hidden room in a house she had lived in all her life, a room filled with peace and silence and a kind of knowing that went beyond thinking. As Lin learned to access this inner stillness, her entire relationship with her anxiety began to change. Instead of being overwhelmed by anxious thoughts, she learned to observe them from the deep stillness, watching them arise and pass away like ripples on the surface of the river. She discovered that anxiety was not her enemy to be fought, but simply another movement in the flow of consciousness, no more permanent or significant than the waves that occasionally disturbed the river's surface. Months passed, and Lin's transformation became apparent to everyone who knew her. The tight lines around her eyes softened, her movements became more graceful, and she carried herself with a kind of quiet confidence that drew people to her. But more importantly, she had learned to access a source of peace that no external circumstances could disturb. One morning, as the season was changing from summer to autumn, Lynn sat with Tick in their usual spot on the river. The air was crisp and clear, and the water reflected the golden light of the rising sun like a mirror. As they sat in their customary stillness, Lynn felt something she had never experienced before. She felt as if she were not separate from the river at all, but was simply another expression of the same flowing consciousness that moved through the water, the fish, the trees, and everything else in the natural world. In that moment of profound connection, she understood what Tick's grandfather had been pointing toward all those years ago. The stillness they had been cultivating was not just a personal practice or a technique for reducing anxiety. It was a way of remembering their true nature, their fundamental interconnectedness with all of life. When they sat in stillness on the river, they were not just calming their individual minds. They were participating in the vast stillness that underlies all movement, the eternal peace that is the source and destination of all flowing. As the sun climbed higher and the morning mist began to lift from the water, Tick finally reached for his net. But before he cast it, he looked at Lynn with eyes that sparkled with the wisdom of the river itself. "Now you understand," he said softly. "We do not fish to take from the river. We fish to give ourselves to the river, and in that giving we receive everything we need." As he cast the net with the fluid grace that had been passed down through generations, Lynn felt a deep gratitude wash over her like the gentle current of the ancient water. She had come to the river seeking relief from anxiety, but she had found something far more precious. She had found her way home to the stillness that had always been present within her, waiting patiently like the deep water beneath the surface, ready to receive her whenever she was ready to sink down into its eternal peace. Story 4. The Lantern Maker's Secret. In the heart of an ancient city where narrow alleys twisted like the lines on an old palm, there lived a lantern maker named May. Her workshop was a sanctuary of soft light and gentle silence filled with the scent of rice paper and bamboo. People from distant villages traveled for days just to buy one of May's lanterns, believing that her creations could bring peace to even the most restless hearts. May's secret was not in her hands, though they moved with the grace of falling petals. Nor was it in her eyes, though they reflected the glow of countless lanterns. The true secret lay in her practice of mindful presence, a wisdom passed down from her grandmother, who had learned it from a wandering Zen monk long ago. Each morning, before the city awoke, May would sit in the center of her workshop, surrounded by unfinished lanterns and scattered tools. She would close her eyes and breathe, feeling the rise and fall of her chest, the coolness of the dawn air, the distant sounds of roosters calling the sun. In this quiet space, May would let go of every plan, every worry, every desire for the day ahead. She would simply rest in the gentle awareness that was always present beneath the surface of her thoughts. When she opened her eyes, May would begin her work, moving slowly and deliberately. She would select each piece of bamboo with care, listening for the subtle song that told her it was ready to become a frame. She would cut the rice paper with a steady hand, noticing the way the fibers caught the light. As she assembled each lantern, she would breathe her presence into every fold and seam, infusing her work with a peace that could be felt but never seen. Customers would often ask May how her lanterns seemed to glow with a light that soothed the mind and calmed the heart. She would smile and say, "The lantern is not just for lighting the darkness. It is for remembering the light that is always within you." Some would nod politely, not understanding, while others would pause, sensing a truth that could not be put into words. One evening, as the city prepared for the annual Festival of Lights, a young scholar named John entered May's workshop. His face was drawn and weary, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights spent studying for the imperial exams. He asked May to make him a lantern that would help him find peace and clarity, for his mind was tangled with fear and doubt. May invited June to sit with her as she worked. She did not speak, but simply began her practice, moving with the same mindful presence that had guided her hands for years. June watched her at first impatiently, then with growing curiosity. He noticed how May's breath seemed to guide her every movement, how her attention never wavered from the task at hand, how she smiled softly even when her fingers made a mistake. As the hours passed, June felt his own breath begin to slow, his thoughts quieting, like dust settling after a storm. He realized that May was not just making a lantern, she was demonstrating a way of being, a way of meeting each moment with acceptance and gentle attention. When the lantern was finished, May handed it to Joan and said, "This lantern holds no magic. Its light is the same as any other. But if you hold it with presence, if you breathe with it, you may discover a peace that cannot be disturbed by any exam, any fear, any future." That night, as the city's streets filled with glowing lanterns and laughter, June sat alone in his small room, holding May's lantern in his hands. He watched the candle flame flicker behind the rice paper, casting gentle shadows on the walls. He remembered May's steady breath, her calm presence, her patient hands. June closed his eyes and breathed with the lantern, letting go of his need to succeed, his fear of failure, his endless striving for perfection. In the soft glow, he felt a quiet joy arise within him, a joy that had nothing to do with passing exams or earning praise. It was the joy of simply being, of resting in the light that was always present beneath the surface of his restless mind. When dawn came, June rose with a clear mind and a peaceful heart. He carried the lantern with him to the exam hall, not as a charm for good luck, but as a reminder of the stillness he had found within himself. And, though he did not know what the future would bring, he walked forward with the confidence of one who had learned the lantern maker's secret, that true peace is not found in the world outside, but in the gentle, unwavering light of mindful presence. As the years passed, June would return to May's workshop whenever his mind grew troubled or his heart grew heavy. He would sit with her in silence, watching her hands move with the same graceful patience, and each time he would remember the secret that could never be lost, that within every moment, no matter how dark or uncertain, there is a light that can guide us home to peace. Story 5. The Bell of Returning. In a secluded monastery high above the clouds where the world below seemed distant and dreamlike, there hung a great bronze bell. Its voice was deep and resonant, echoing through the valleys at dawn and dusk. The monks called it the Bell of Returning, for its sound was said to bring wandering minds home to the present moment. The bell was cared for by an elderly monk named Anne, whose life was a testament to the power of gentle attention. Every morning, before the sun crested the mountains, Anne would approach the bell with a soft cloth and a quiet mind. He would clean its surface with slow circular motions, breathing in harmony with each movement, whispering words of gratitude for its enduring presence. Anne had not always known peace. In his youth, He was restless and easily troubled, his thoughts darting from past regrets to future worries like birds flitting between branches. He had come to the monastery seeking relief from the storms within his mind, hoping that the silence of the mountains would quiet his heart. At first, the silence only made his thoughts louder, and would sit in meditation, his body still but his mind racing. He would replay old mistakes, imagine endless scenarios, and wonder if he would ever find rest. The abbot, seeing his struggle, assigned him the task of caring for the bell. On his first morning, Anne approached the bell with reluctance. He saw it as just another chore, another demand on his already burdened mind. But as he began to clean its surface, he noticed the way the morning light danced on the bronze, the coolness of the metal beneath his fingers, the subtle patterns etched by generations of caretakers. For a moment his thoughts paused, and he felt a quiet presence fill the space around him. The abbot noticed this change and encouraged Anne to bring his full attention to the bell each day. "Let the bell teach you," the abbot said. "Return to this moment again and again as the bell returns its sound to the valley." Anne began to approach his task with curiosity. He learned to listen for the first sound of the bell at dawn, to feel the vibration in his chest, to notice how the echo lingered long after the strike. He discovered that the bell was not just an object, but a teacher. Its sound was a reminder to return to the breath, to the body, to the simple reality of now. Over the years, Anne's mind grew quieter. The storms of regret and worry still arose, but he learned to meet them with the same gentle attention he gave the bell. When his thoughts wandered, he would smile and return just as the bell's sound always returned to silence. He found that peace was not the absence of thought, but the willingness to return again and again to the present. Visitors to the monastery often remarked on the tranquility they felt when the bell rang. Some said it eased their grief. Others felt their anxieties dissolve in its deep resonance. Anne would tell them, "The bell does not remove your burdens. It reminds you that you can set them down, even if only for a moment. Each return is a new beginning." One autumn, a young novice named Dao arrived at the monastery, his heart heavy with sorrow from a recent loss. He struggled to find comfort in meditation, his mind pulled constantly back to memories and longing, and invited Dao to join him in caring for the bell. At first, Dao's hands trembled as he worked. Tears would fall silently as he polished the bronze, his grief raw and insistent. Anne did not offer advice or consolation. Instead, he simply worked beside Dao, breathing with him, returning with him to the present moment again and again. Gradually, Dao found that the act of caring for the bell brought small moments of relief. The weight of his sorrow would lift, if only briefly, as he focused on the gentle rhythm of his hands, the cool touch of the metal, the sound of the bell's voice echoing through the dawn mist. He learned that healing was not a single event, but a practice of returning over and over to the place where peace could be found. As winter settled over the mountains, Anne and Dao continued their daily ritual. The bell's sound grew softer in the snow, but its presence remained steady. Dao's grief softened not because it disappeared, but because he learned to meet it with compassion and patience. He discovered that every moment offered a chance to return, to begin again, to find stillness in the heart of sorrow. Years later, when Anne grew too old to care for the bell, he passed the task to Dao. On his final morning as a caretaker, Anne stood before the bell with Dao at his side. He placed Dao's hand on the bronze and whispered, "The bell's wisdom is simple. Return. Return to this breath, this touch, this sound. In returning, you will always find your way home." Dao nodded, feeling the truth of Anne's words settle deep within him. As he struck the bell and listened to its echo go rolling through the silent valley, he understood that the practice of returning was endless, and that in each return there was peace enough to meet any sorrow, any joy, any moment. And so the bell continued to ring through the ages, its sound a gentle invitation to all who heard it return. Return, return. Story 6. The Whispering Bamboo Grove. In a quiet corner of the world, where the mountains met the mist and the sky seemed to bow gently to the earth, there was a bamboo grove known to the villagers as the place where worries disappeared. The bamboo grew tall and slender, their emerald leaves whispering secrets to the wind. It was said that anyone who entered the grove with a troubled mind would leave feeling lighter, as if the bamboo had absorbed their burdens. The caretaker of the grove was a woman named Hana. She was neither a monk nor a scholar, but her wisdom was deep as the roots of the bamboo she tended. Hana's life had not been easy. She had known loss and loneliness, disappointment and despair. Yet those who spoke with her always left with a sense of hope, as if she had shown them a hidden path through the thicket of their own thoughts. Every morning, Hana walked the winding path through the grove, her bare feet brushing the cool earth. She would pause at each cluster of bamboo, listening not just with her ears, but with her whole being. She believed that the bamboo spoke in a language beyond words, a language of patience and acceptance of bending without breaking. One spring, a merchant named Rio came to the village, his face shadowed by exhaustion and anxiety. His business had failed, his family was distant, and his nights were haunted by dreams of loss. Hearing of the bamboo grove, he sought out Hana, hoping for some remedy to his restless mind. Hana welcomed Rio with a gentle smile and invited him to walk with her among the bamboo. At first, Rio spoke quickly, his words tumbling out in a torrent of worry about debts, about mistakes, about all the things he could not control. Hana listened without interruption, her presence as steady as the bamboo trunks rising around them. When Rio finally fell silent, Hana stopped and placed her hand on a young bamboo shoot. "Do you hear the wind?" she asked. Rio listened, and for the first time he noticed the soft rustling of leaves, the gentle creaking of the bamboo as it swayed. "The wind comes and goes," Hana said. "Sometimes it is fierce, sometimes gentle, sometimes not there at all. The bamboo does not resist. It bends, it sways, it sings with the wind. And when the wind passes, it stands tall again." Rio frowned, uncertain. "But what if the wind is too strong? What if it breaks the bamboo?" Hana smiled. "Some bamboo may break, but most will bend. Even when broken, the bamboo nourishes the earth, making room for new shoots. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is lost. The bamboo teaches us to yield, to let go, to trust, that we can return to standing tall, no matter how strong the storm." They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the music of the grove. Rio felt his breath slow, his heart soften. The worries that had seemed so urgent began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet acceptance. He realized that he did not have to fight. Every wind did not have to control every outcome. He could bend, he could yield, and he could trust in his own resilience. Before he left, Hana gave him a small flute carved from bamboo. "When your mind is troubled," she said, "play this flute. Let your breath move through it as the wind moves through the grove. Remember the bamboo song, and let it remind you to bend, not break." Rio returned to his life with a new perspective. When worries arose, he would sit quietly and play the flute, letting its gentle notes carry his anxieties away. He learned to meet each challenge with the patience of the bamboo, to yield when necessary, and to trust that he could always return to peace. As the years passed, many others came to the grove, seeking relief from their burdens. Hana welcomed them all, sharing the wisdom she had learned from the bamboo. She taught them to listen to the wind, to trust in their own flexibility, to remember that even in breaking there was renewal. The grove remained a place of healing, its whispers carrying the promise of resilience to all who entered. And Hana, walking each morning among her beloved bamboo, knew that true strength was not found in resisting life's storms, but in learning to dance with them, to bend without fear, and to trust in the quiet power of returning to stillness. Story 7. The Silent Tea House. In a small mountain village, hidden by clouds and ancient pine trees, there was a tea house unlike any other. Its door was always open, yet no sign announced its presence. The villagers called it the Silent Tea House, for inside words were rarely spoken, and yet everyone left feeling as if they had heard exactly what they needed. The tea house was tended by an old man named Sora, whose hair was as white as the steam rising from his teapots. Sora had once been a renowned teacher, but after a great personal loss, he had retreated to the mountains seeking a peace that words could not bring. In time, he found solace in the simple rituals of making tea, and gradually others began to find their way to his door. Each morning, Sora would sweep the stone steps, arrange the cushions, and prepare his tea with silent reverence. He moved slowly, each gesture a meditation, each breath a prayer. The tea house filled with the scent of roasted leaves and the gentle sound of water boiling. When visitors arrived, Sora greeted them with a deep bow and a warm smile, inviting them to sit in silence. People came with heavy hearts and racing minds, farmers burdened by drought, mothers grieving lost children, travelers weary from the road. They would sit quietly as Sora poured tea, his movements unhurried, his attention complete. No one felt the need to speak of their troubles, for the silence itself seemed to listen, to hold their pain with infinite compassion. As they sipped the tea, something subtle would begin to shift. The warmth of the cup in their hands, the fragrant steam rising to their faces, the slow unfolding of flavor on their tongues, all of it drew them gently into the present moment. Their thoughts, once sharp and restless, softened and faded like mist in the morning sun. Sora's only words, spoken softly at the end of each visit, were always the same. May you find the peace that is already here. Some would nod, some would weep, some would simply bow and depart, carrying with them a quietness that lingered long after they left. One day, a young woman named Emmy arrived at the tea house, her eyes red from sleepless nights. She had lost her job in the city, her dreams scattered like autumn leaves. She sat in silence as Sora prepared the tea, her hands trembling as she lifted the cup to her lips. As she drank, Emmy felt the warmth spread through her chest, melting the knot of anxiety that had tightened around her heart. She watched Sora move with such calm, such presence, and wondered how he had found this peace. When she finished her tea, she looked up, her voice barely a whisper. How do you do it? How do you find peace when everything is falling apart? Sora met her gaze with gentle eyes. He placed his hand over his heart, then over the teapot, then over the empty air between them. He did not speak, but Emmy understood. Peace was not something to be found outside, not something to be achieved or possessed. It was already here in the warmth of the tea, in the silence between words, in the simple act of being present. Emmy returned to the tea house many times, each visit a lesson in silent wisdom. She learned to meet her fears with gentleness, to sit with her sadness without turning away, to trust that peace could be found even in the midst of uncertainty. The tea house became her sanctuary, a place where she remembered the quiet strength that lived within her. As seasons changed and years passed, the silent tea house remained a beacon for all who sought relief from the storms of life. Sora continued his daily rituals, his presence a living reminder that true healing often comes not from answers, but from the deep, abiding silence that holds all questions with love. And so the villagers would say, the greatest wisdom of the silent tea house was this: in the heart of silence, peace is always waiting, ready to welcome us home. Story 8. The Bridge of Gentle Steps. Beneath the shadow of an old cedar forest, a narrow wooden bridge arched over a slow, clear stream. The bridge was worn smooth by generations of footsteps, yet it never creaked or groaned, no matter how many crossed it. Villagers believed the bridge had a spirit of its own, a spirit that rewarded those who crossed with gentleness and presence. The bridge was cared for by a quiet man named Haru. Haru was known for his calm eyes and his unhurried way of moving through the world. Each day he swept the bridge clean of leaves and debris, pausing often to watch the water flow beneath. He never hurried, never seemed distracted, and always greeted those who passed with a deep, silent bow. Haru had not always been so peaceful. As a young man, he had lived in the city where every day felt like a race, every step driven by urgency and ambition. He had built a life of constant striving, but his heart grew heavy and his sleep restless. One day, after a night filled with anxious dreams, he left the city and wandered until he found the village and the bridge. On his first morning as caretaker, Haru tried to sweep the bridge as quickly as he could, eager to finish and move on to other tasks. But the broom caught on a loose plank, and he stumbled, nearly falling into the stream. Sitting on the bridge, catching his breath, Haru heard the gentle gurgle of water and the soft rustle of wind in the cedars. For the first time in years, he simply listened. He began to notice the rhythm of the world around him, the slow movement of clouds, the measured steps of an old woman crossing the bridge, the way the sunlight flickered through the leaves. Haru realized that the bridge was not just a path from one side to the other, but a place of transition, a space between where one could pause and remember to move gently. He made a vow to himself from that day forward. He would cross the bridge with gentle steps, never rushing, always aware of each movement. As he practiced, he found that his mind grew quieter, his heart lighter. The worries that once chased him faded with each careful step. Word spread through the village that those who crossed the bridge slowly in silence would find their burdens eased. People began to come not just to reach the other side, but to walk mindfully, feeling the wood beneath their feet, the cool air on their skin, the presence of the water below. Some would pause halfway, standing in stillness, letting go of the thoughts and anxieties they had carried with them. One day, a boy named Kato arrived at the bridge, his face tight with frustration. He had quarreled with his friends and stormed away, his mind full of angry words. As he stepped onto the bridge, Haru greeted him with a gentle bow and invited him to walk together one slow step at a time. At first, Kaito resisted, wanting to hurry across and be done. But Haru's calm presence was steady as the bridge itself. Gradually, Kaito's steps slowed. He noticed the warmth of the sun on his shoulders, the sound of birds calling from the trees, the way his breath matched the rhythm of his feet. By the time they reached the far side, Kaito's anger had softened, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. Haru knelt and showed Kaito how to touch the wood with gratitude, how to bow to the stream below, how to leave behind whatever burdens he no longer wished to carry. Each step is a new beginning, Haru whispered. The bridge does not judge what you bring. It only asks that you cross with care. Kaito returned to the bridge many times, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. He learned that when his mind was troubled, a slow walk across the bridge could restore his balance. He shared this secret with others, and soon the bridge became a place where villagers came to remember the power of gentle steps. As the years passed, Haru grew older, but his steps never lost their grace. He taught the children of the village to care for the bridge, to sweep it slowly, to honor it as a place of transformation. He reminded them that in a world that often rushed and pushed, there was great wisdom in moving gently and crossing each threshold with presence and care. And so the bridge remained a silent teacher beneath the cedars, offering its gift to all who cross, the reminder that peace is found not in reaching the other side, but in the gentle, mindful steps we take along the way. Story 9. The Painter of Passing Clouds. In a village perched on the edge of rolling hills where the sky seemed to stretch forever, there lived a painter named Kaid. Her home was a small cottage with windows facing east so that every morning she could watch the clouds drift across the dawn. Kaid was known for her paintings of clouds, soft, luminous, and ever-changing. People said her art brought a sense of calm and wonder, as if each brushstroke contained a breath of sky. Kaida's secret was not in her skill, though her hands were steady and her eyes sharp. It was in her relationship with impermanence. She had learned through years of watching the sky that nothing stayed the same for long. Not the colors of the clouds, not the shape of the hills, not the feelings in her own heart. Instead of resisting change, Kaide welcomed it, letting each moment pass through her like wind through an open window. Each morning, Kaide would sit by her window with a blank canvas and wait. She did not begin painting until she felt her mind settle. Her breath slow, her attention soften. Sometimes she would watch a single cloud drift and dissolve, never lifting her brush. Other times she would paint quickly, capturing the fleeting dance of light and shadow before it vanished. Villagers often visited Kaide, bringing their worries and sorrows. They would sit beside her watching the sky, their troubles shrinking in the vastness above. Kaide taught them to notice how clouds appeared and disappeared without struggle, how the sky never clung to any single form. She would say, "Let your thoughts be like these clouds, coming and going, never needing to stay." One afternoon, a young man named Taro arrived at Kaide's door, his face clouded with grief. He had lost his father, and the pain weighed on him like a storm that would not pass. He asked Kaide how she found peace when everything seemed to change and slip away. Kaide invited Taro to sit with her by the window. Together, they watched the sky as clouds gathered dark and heavy, then slowly broke apart, revealing patches of blue. "Do you see how the clouds move?" Kaide asked softly. "Even the darkest ones do not last. The sky does not hold on to them, nor does it push them away. It simply allows them to come and go." Taro watched in silence, his breath gradually deepening. He realized that his grief too was like a cloud, real, present, but not forever. He did not need to force it away or pretend it wasn't there. He could let it move through him, trusting that in time it would change. Kide handed Taro a brush and a small canvas. "Paint the sky as you see it now," she encouraged. Taro's hand trembled at first, but as he focused on the shifting clouds, his mind grew quieter. He painted the heavy grays, the hints of light, the space between forms. In the act of painting, he felt his pain soften, replaced by a gentle acceptance. Over the following weeks, Taro returned, often painting with Kade, learning to welcome each feeling as it arose and faded. He discovered that peace was not the absence of sorrow, but the willingness to let every emotion pass through like clouds across the sky. Kade continued her practice, painting the endless transformations above, teaching all who came to her that nothing needed to be held forever, not joy, not pain, not even the most beautiful moment. In the art of letting go, she found the deepest serenity, and so the cottage on the hill became a place where villagers learned to greet each day with openness, to trust in the wisdom of passing clouds, and to remember that the sky is always vast enough to hold whatever comes and goes. Story 10. The Quiet Path Home. Beyond the bustling towns and noisy markets, there was a narrow path winding through ancient forests, leading to a small temple hidden among the trees. The villagers called it the Quiet Path, for those who walked it found their hurried thoughts slow, their restless hearts calm, and their weary bodies restored. The path was cared for by a humble monk named Jin, who had spent many years walking it slowly barefoot, with nothing but a simple robe and a bowl. Jin's footsteps were light and steady, his gaze soft and clear. He believed that the path itself was a teacher offering lessons in patience, presence, and the gentle art of coming home to oneself. When Jin first arrived at the temple as a young novice, he was full of restless energy and anxious thoughts. The world outside was loud and demanding, and his mind raced to keep up. The abbot noticed Jin's struggle and invited him to walk the quiet path each morning before dawn. At first, Jin hurried along the path, eager to reach the temple and begin his duties. But the abbot gently reminded him, "The path is not a race. It is a journey inward. Walk with care, and you will find what you seek." Jin began to slow his pace, noticing the soft moss beneath his feet, the cool breath of the morning air, the delicate songs of birds waking in the trees. With each step, he felt his mind settle, his breath deepen, his heart open. The path became a moving meditation, a living prayer. One morning, as Jin walked the quiet path, he encountered a traveler named May, who had lost her way in both the forest and in life. She carried a heavy pack and heavier burdens, her eyes clouded with worry. Jin invited her to walk with him, not speaking much, but sharing the silence and the gentle rhythm of their steps. As they moved together, May began to notice the world around her, the way sunlight filtered through leaves, the scent of earth after rain, the steady pulse of her own breath. The worries that had weighed her down seemed to lighten with each mindful step. When they reached the temple, Jin offered May a simple bowl of tea and a place to rest. He told her, "The path is always here, waiting. It is the way back to yourself, the way to peace. You do not need to carry your burdens alone. Walk slowly, breathe deeply, and come home." May stayed at the temple for many days, learning to walk the quiet path with awareness and kindness. She discovered that peace was not a distant destination, but a gentle presence available in every step, every breath, every moment. Years later, when Jin's hair had turned silver and his steps had grown slow and deliberate, he continued to walk the quiet path each morning. He knew that the path was endless, a circle that led always back to the heart. And he understood that no matter where life's journey took him, he could always find his way home by walking with gentle steps, open eyes, and a peaceful heart. The villagers who passed by the temple often spoke of the quiet path as a place of healing and hope. They said that those who walked it slowly with mindful attention found their anxieties dissolve and their spirits lift. And many returned again and again, carrying the quiet wisdom of the path into their daily lives. And so the quiet path remained a timeless invitation to all who sought rest from the noise of the world. It whispered softly to every wandering soul, "Come home. Come home to stillness. Come home to peace.